Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today for this episode of Demystifying Money. I'm your host, Misty Lynch, and today I'm joined by my friend Julie Menden. She is also a coach that I've worked with to help me develop some of my skills when it comes to speaking and developing keynote conversations. So thank you, Julie, so much for joining me today.
I am so excited, Misty. Thank you for having me.
So Julie owns Julie Menden LLC, which is a boutique coach training firm. She works with executive leadership, high performers, trying to help them learn how to reach their peak performance. And she's also a certified coach and on the Forbes Coaches Council. I think that, she's one of the most, I started following Julie a while ago, just on her LinkedIn and listening to what she was saying about leadership, about getting your message out there, being heard. And I think it's such an important thing for people, whether you're self-employed, whether you're working, at a corporation, or if you're just trying to get your family, other people to listen to you and to speak up. It's something that I feel like we're not really taught in a way, and we feel like some people just have it or some people don't. And
Mhm.
so I love that Julie is helping everybody kind of develop those skills that they need in order to become more confident, influential. So I'd love to hear, Julie, kind of your career path, how you got to this point where you felt like this is what you need to do as far as helping people build these skills.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. And even just hearing that, like I get so fired up about this topic. I get this so much energy and excitement to talk about this because I truly do think this is such a huge differentiator for people in their career growth and honestly in like life satisfaction. When you can work on your confidence, sometimes they say like coming back to who you were maybe as a kid, and you can come back to this just essence of who you were and then use your voice and speak up for it. And I talk about leadership in the sense of not necessarily always leading other people, but self leadership, where you can lead yourself and have this influence. And so my journey to this point, in a nutshell, was I always saw myself as a leader, to be honest. I always wanted to be leading team projects. I also have been public speaking since I was a kid. So I was, in 4-H, and I would be on the leadership boards and be the one presenting ideas to the adults or to the group. Group projects, usually I was the first one to volunteer. And so I have always had this passion for speaking and using my voice. And I see now the power that that has and kind of leading me to where I am. I went to college and actually got a degree in interpersonal communication. And then I started working, and honestly, I was doing some type of training, development, leadership work ever since I graduated. So I worked for a for-profit college, helping students get careers and helping them with interview prep. I worked at the American Cancer Society where I was leading these Relay for Life events and oftentimes was, presenting to people for sponsorship and things. And then I spent the majority of my time working in a large corporate Fortune 500 company where I was in leadership development. So I was helping develop training and helping people from brand new leaders all the way up through executives in the company on things like their influence skills, presenting with confidence, team dynamics, change management. I worked, for a brief stint in the public sector, helping local municipalities in that space. And in all of those experiences, I started to realize that a lot of people in leadership roles aren't aware of who they are feeling a lack of confidence and awareness, and struggle with communication. And so that led me to actually get certified as a coach
Mhm.
and decide to start my own business where I could actually help people in a really different way. I always say our firm does leadership development differently because we start with instead of giving you all these, frameworks and tools to use that are helpful, but we start first about who you are, getting more awareness of that, what blocks are getting in the way, and now how do we bring more of your skills out to be able to have success and influence other people. So I look back now, I go, I see how all these pieces are connected and how it led me to where I am now. So I've been in, business for 4 years now.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting, especially what you said about looking within for the person, because I do think that there are a lot of people who are like, yes, I know that I need to go live on social media. I'm supposed to do this, I'm supposed to do that. And that can feel very unnatural to them. Maybe that's not how they communicate, or even people who think I'm an introvert. I'm not those
Mhm.
people who are out there who, like you and I both I did impromptu speaking in like the FB, like the future business in like in high
Yeah.
school. Like I
Yeah.
just knew like this is what I like to do. This kind of came easily to me to
Mhm.
be able to just get up and talk about something. And that's not necessarily, I can see that that's not like one of my kids. Absolutely not.
Mhm.
The other one, maybe. But it's just something that I feel like all of us have to do at some point or another when it comes to growing our wealth or our business. Even
Mhm.
you mentioned when you worked with getting sponsorship. I've talked to
Mhm.
people that are trying to raise money for organizations, causes that they love deeply and feel very passionate about, and they feel so nervous to talk to
Mhm.
somebody else about that to get them to participate. And that can be a huge part of growing that influence or even getting dollars to help fund
Mhm.
your cause, your organization. So I think it's really important that you're looking at that person individually and their skills to build them, because there isn't just one way to do it, right? There isn't just
No.
one
Yeah.
path to success where you have to be that extroverted, big, charismatic leader.
Mhm.
Like, tell me about the people that you're working with that maybe feel that that is not them and they're stuck
Mhm.
on what they need to do.
This is such an important point, Misty. And I talk about this again, whether it's I'm working with a brand new leader who is like leading people for the first time and they're like, I don't know how to give feedback. I have to present to this executive team and I'm like sweating and my voice is shaky and my hand is shaky. Or it is a business owner who is trying to show up and get clients and get business and show up on video. I always have the same message of you don't have to show up like anybody else, because I think this is one of the things that really holds people back is they look at sometimes me and they go, oh my gosh, this is your personality. Or they look at other people on stages, they look at other people presenting and they go, that's not me. They see that as I have to be really extroverted. I have to be really energetic. I have to really bubbly and get like the hoorah rah person. And that's not true, because if you try and show up like somebody else, your confidence, you're not going to have any of it because you're trying to put on this like facade of somebody else and you're never going to feel comfortable. And so that's why I always say it really starts with getting more clear on who you are and what you want and what is your own personal, what's your unique style that you want to bring. If you look at speakers, I mean, obviously I'm a speaker, I help people with speaking. And so I study other speakers. There are speakers out there who are very introverted. You can tell, and they're quiet. They're not the one jumping around on stage, or they're not the one cheering and getting everyone to dance around, but they have this presence about them because they speak with intentionality. They can really draw people in. They might even be a little more soft spoken, which actually gets people to lean in and really listen. And so when I'm working with somebody who feels like, that's not me, quote unquote, that's not me, I really challenge that limiting belief for them and asking where it came from. Honestly, most of the time it came from childhood for people. I got made fun of for a stutter in school. I, had my public speaking course in high school and my teacher told me I wasn't good at public speaking. Like, we carry these stories around with us into adulthood and put these limits on ourselves. And then a lot of people then fear showing up. And public speaking, if you're listening to this and you're going, yeah, that's a big fear, it's still one of people's top fears. I looked recently, it's still the top fear for people over death. So if you are listening and you're scared of it, you're not alone, but that also doesn't mean that has to always be your story.
Yeah, no, and I think you're right, because I think sometimes our brains will go to like like I remember speaking right after somebody who was like throwing rubber ducks into the
Yeah.
audience. She had like hype music. And I just was thinking in my head, I'm like, oh, I wonder if everybody is going to be like extremely put to sleep when I start talking. But it was interesting because it wasn't necessarily that way. And I feel like there are different ways to connect to people. And some people, like you said, if you're talking, if it's a little slower, they might listen or engage in a different way that maybe isn't that same type of energy, because you never know what's going to, be the best presentation somebody heard or what somebody likes to hear or how they learn. And so I think that's just a way for us to stay small and say, nope, I can't do that level. I'm not Mel Robb. I'm not this. So
Mm-hmm.
I might as
Mm-hmm.
well like not try. And I think that is holding a lot of people back. A lot of people that maybe have a really interesting story, a
Mm-hmm.
really important point to make. So I think that's great that you're kind of challenging that belief, because I could see it. It's very easy to point out to, those speakers
Mm-hmm.
and say, okay, I don't think I want to do that. But I do think that is certainly something that we probably heard as a kid, be quiet, be seen and
Mm-hmm.
not heard. I know a lot of us girls have heard that one before.
Mm-hmm.
And I always rejected it flat out from when I was,
Mm-hmm.
little. But I think that, sometimes those things stay with you. And that's why to have that be a number one fear for people
Mm-hmm.
is really, and your body will react. So what do you say to those people who actually feel those physical responses when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to having to either speak in front of a board meeting or a
Mm-hmm.
group? Those people who feel their heart rate or their voice crack. I've listened to those speakers. I've been
Mm-hmm.
in those rooms with those people where you feel it too, like it hurts. What do
Yeah.
you say to those when it's something that it's hard to practice because you can't
Mm-hmm.
really create the environment? How can those people become more confident in their skills?
Mm-hmm. And that's such a great question. Bring this back to too of when we think of people's money and taking ownership of your finances and all of that. I just want, for those of you listening to really think about the impact of you not using your voice. So I always say I help people find, own, and use their voice. And again, that for you, it might be asking for a raise. That for you might be having a tough conversation on finances. That for you might be asking for help. Or for you, that might be being on stages or presenting to boards. You finding, owning, and using your voice is unique to you and what that means for you. And so think of the impact if you are not speaking up for yourself to ask for what you want. Again, we do see this typically more in women. They're afraid to ask for raises, or they're afraid to, if they're going for a new job, ask for what they want, like all of those types of things. Think of how that ripple effect sets you back down the road in that regards. And so from the physical aspect, yeah, and this is just to acknowledge, like if you are somebody who gets those things, like even if you just have to talk to one person about something kind of tough or uncomfortable, that might be you where your voice is cracking, or maybe it's when you have to get in front of a group of people or get on video. The thing is that your body is responding a lot to those emotions that you have and to the mindset that you have. And so I always say, if we want to start to get a handle on those things, is first you need to practice more. People don't love to hear that, but you need to practice more, right? Because the more that you do it, the more comfortable you're going to get. And so the more that you intentionally put yourself in situations where you have to do it, your body is going to start to respond because it's not going to feel so uncomfortable. A lot of the times people shy away from having to speak. And so their body's like, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do? Well, if you're intentionally putting yourself in your situations over and over and over again, it's slowly going to start to feel more comfortable. And so I say practice. So if this is something you're working on intentionally, even if it's raising your hand and speaking up in a meeting or turning on that video and going live, whatever it might look like, do more of the reps, put more reps in general. And then getting ready for, especially if it's like a, tough conversation or a presentation or something like that, really prepping leading up to it. And when I say prep, I always bring together like the mindset and the tangible. So I want you to get your mind around, how do I want to show up? Like actually visualize yourself in that room, what you're wearing, how you're moving, who's in the room, visualize yourself there and say to yourself how you want to be showing up. Don't tell yourself like, oh, I hope my voice doesn't shake, because then that's literally what you're looking at. That's what you're looking for. Start saying, I'm confident, I'm powerful, I'm empathetic, whatever it is that you want to bring into that situation. I want you to prep the days leading up to it and actually tell yourself that and visualize yourself. And then also practice the words that you're saying and the flow of it. Because the more practiced you are, then the more present that you actually can be in that moment. And so honestly, it's practice. It's putting yourself in those situations. It's rewiring your brain, honestly, around how you want to show up in that situation.
It's interesting how you can rewire. Like I remember before I went on maternity leave, I was doing presentations in my corporate job, and I had somebody on my team who hated public speaking but wanted to be better at it. And so I like when I left, I had him run the team meeting or like organize a talk, and then he was doing like the intros for the webinars that I used to do. By the time I got back, it was not a problem for him anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He just had to he did it because he wanted to help me. He knew that it had to be done. It was part of it. But it was funny because it was really a big, huge fear, a big, scary. And then I think your brain just realizes that, like, okay, no, actually, I'm just talking into a microphone or a speaker. There's not a saber-toothed tiger that's going to come out,
Mm-hmm.
even though my body's reacting like it is. And
Mm-hmm.
by the time I got back, he was like, I can keep doing it if you want. Like it was just not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
which was just interesting because there's really like, there is a way that your brain will adapt. Like it just
Yeah.
does.
And it listens to what you tell it, right? So if you tell it that it's scary, if you tell yourself, I'm not a good speaker, I'm not this or that,
Mhm.
that's what you're focused on. That's what you see. Those are the connections you've made in your brain. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to change that and start to tell yourself, like, I am confident. And even, another tip would be think of a situation. Now, sometimes people are like, I don't have any, but think of a time that maybe you did talk on a webinar, or you did present something, you did say something that you were like, oh, that went really well, or I was really confident, and really tap into those instances. And how can you bring that into this situation that you're in right now?
Yeah, it's just so hard to, sometimes we're so good at visualizing the worst case scenario
Yeah.
or thinking about the times we messed up that we forget about what the best case scenario could be, and
Mm-hmm.
thinking about that and giving that as much energy as we do
Mm-hmm.
to what we don't want. And I think all of us, even if we haven't felt it ourselves, can remember a time where somebody maybe who never speaks up spoke up and made a
Mm-hmm.
really good point, or you're really grateful that they did. I think we can all find those situations where we know the people that are always running the meetings or talking, and we hear from them all the time. But I think it is so valuable in a corporate setting, in a business setting, to hear from other people. And so that's where I think we can start to visualize all of the people who'd be impacted by it, not just us not speaking up, but like you said, your family, if you don't ask for that raise or make that point, or your
Mm-hmm.
community, or other people in the room who might be listening and
Mm-hmm.
and looking at you for advice. And I think that's really, it's just the visualization is so helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Or even just kind of spending some time being curious about those situations that maybe aren't as terrifying. Um, I wanted to talk with you about leadership for a little bit. I know some people have gotten a leadership position, maybe at work, and maybe that's what they wanted. Maybe they were hoping for that next step. And a lot of times in some situations, it goes from being an individual contributor to now being a leader or a people manager. And that training doesn't necessarily, being good at your job doesn't necessarily
Mm-hmm.
make you a good leader. So, what are some of the ways that people who are in leadership positions that feel like they're afraid to have difficult conversations, or they don't feel like they know how to communicate or lead a team? How do you help those people kind of build those skills that really don't just come from on the job training?
Hmm. I mean, this is something that we see. This is the number one thing that I'm typically helping people and organizations out with. So when I'm working with an executive and one-on-one coaching environment, or oftentimes if I get a call from an organization who's looking to develop their leaders or work on upskilling leaders, usually the thing we're talking about is some type of communication when it comes to like giving people feedback, having performance review conversations, presenting to people in a clear way. That's usually the thing that we're working on. And I see it at all different levels. One common misconception that I experienced when I was a new leader in in an organization, and I see in my clients, is we look to people who are in executive roles and we think they have it all figured out. I remember feeling that way. Like they don't doubt themselves. They've got all this confidence. Well, now what I can tell you is we're going to humanize leadership, and I'm going to unveil like the curtain here to tell you they also experience it. They've got maybe more years of experience, and they've navigated maybe more situations than you if you're a newer leader. However, every single, promotion, every single up level reveals more of that imposter syndrome, and that, now they're presenting bigger things or more strategic things. And so whether you're a new leader or, a CEO, you have those moments of doubting yourself and kind of wondering, how do I have these difficult conversations? Because every single time they get tougher and tougher. And so some of the things that, we always talk about is, again, I come back to that awareness, like it just always comes from within. An example I use with people is, if you have an apple tree and you want to turn it into an orange tree, can you just pick the fruit on the outside? No, you have to get to the root. And so if we are really looking at how do I step into my leadership, we have to get to the root of what is getting in the way. And that's often the story you're telling yourself, the feeling like, you know, especially when it comes to having like a difficult conversation with people, having to have a performance review. A lot of the times when I'm working with leaders, what I hear them say is things like, you know, I don't get why they just like don't do it. Or I've kind of had the conversation. A lot of times they skirt around it. They're not very direct in giving feedback. And so, they worry about what the people are going to think, especially if they are a newer leader and they're now managing people that were peers before. That comes with a lot of self-doubt. What are they going to think of me? Are people going to like me? And so usually what I see is people go one of two ways then. They either avoid having those conversations and addressing it and they keep tolerating things, or sometimes they come off too strong because they're trying to overcompensate and they're trying to prove their worth and their value. And so what I say is first, you've got to be aware that that's happening. You've got to address like, why am I not having this conversation? Why am I avoiding this conversation? And then going, what conversations need to be had? And then really thinking about, again, I kind of have this like almost feedback checklist where the same thing I did with presenting, you kind of get your mindset in the right place. You think of and plan and prep for the conversation. Like, what do I want to make sure I say? What's the ultimate goal that I want us to have achieved after this? Maybe what sort of, information do I need to bring with me into this meeting to prepare me and kind of tool me up to have it? And then going in with curiosity, like how can I be more open in this conversation and in this situation versus judging myself or judging other people? So those would be a couple things. So just plan more, think about what could be getting in the way, and really think about the impact for you. Like, what does it cost? Sometimes when I ask people this, they get like that sucker punch moment, but what is it costing you to not be having these conversations and not be speaking up?
Yeah. And I think that's something that is really important. And you're totally right. I remember being in a leadership position where then I was like managing the team that I was on. So you go from like all of your friends, and then some people
Mm-hmm.
were telling me the advice of you have no longer can be friends with your team. You can't do this. You can't do that. You have to be like leader. And then other people I'd seen kind of be afraid to step into that role to be like, but what if no one likes me anymore and I lose all my friends? And so they tolerated so much poor performance that they were then judged for their team. And so I feel like there is kind of a delicate balance there.
Mm-hmm.
That going into one of those extremes is not necessarily going to be that helpful for you, for the whole organization. And I think we've all seen talented people leave, who
Mm-hmm.
never spoke up and never really said what was wrong or that they weren't happy. And then all of a sudden they're gone. And so these leaders who maybe aren't asking the right questions, who aren't skilled to kind of pick up on things, are like, well, I don't know what happened.
Yeah,
Usually they're saying it's leadership.
that's so true.
And so I feel like this investment for companies, for leaders, like exactly to make in their business and in their team is very financially beneficial,
Mm-hmm.
because if you don't have strong leaderships or strong teams, most people who are out there looking around, it might not be the pay, it might not be the work, but it might be those relationships and that communication where there's a breakdown. So I think this is a huge area that
Mm-hmm.
businesses that are looking to grow and scale should be focusing on, is training their leaders.
It's so true. And these conversations that are not being had, and this communication that between departments, between levels within the organization, like that is why people they're leaving the culture, because they feel like there's not development opportunities or they feel like they're not being heard. But we're seeing it on both sides is the leaders are not equipped to have these conversations. They don't have the support and the training on how to have those conversations. And then the person developing or wanting those opportunities isn't really fully equipped and aware to how to address that thing, and so they're either being quiet or they're demanding. So we're seeing this even more and more now when we look at engagement and retention in organizations, and the cost for an organization to lose especially good talent, high potentials, things like that. It can cost the person's salary or more to replace that person. And so when we look at making the investment, like if we can tool up, people within your organization to have these tough conversations, to work on their presence and their influence, it's not only, helps with that engagement or retention, but it helps the financial state of the individual people and of the organization.
Mhm. Yeah, I think there's so much that like it always, usually money is blamed. It comes down to,
Yeah.
well, I can't afford to do that. Or, well, they're leaving for more money. And a lot of times, more times than not, even times where I've left roles, after a certain point, if you feel like you're not being heard, whether it's your inability to communicate or that person's ability to lead and listen, eventually you just stop. And then your brain starts to go, okay, well, what do I do next? All right, maybe I'll just start looking. Okay, maybe. And then you go to these interviews where you're able to communicate, you're able to, you go into it prepared, because that's the one thing we do tend to
You
do.
do prepare. Yeah.
It's an interview. And
Hmm.
so you're seeing high value employees bouncing around. And I see it as a financial planner too, people who are leaving because they just feel like there's no more opportunity here, or they've
Hmm.
hit that limit. And sometimes it's financially beneficial to make moves, and other times it turns into a longer commute or a more difficult position, and then they think, oh, I wish I had stayed. And they have
Hmm.
some of those regrets, where I feel like there could be certain things that are done in the meantime to
Hmm.
figure out if it's really true, or if it's just your brain kind of telling you a story and getting you to, maybe move into another position because, you've decided that the communication breakdown is just irreparable. So I think
Hmm.
it's a huge investment to make. And then if people are trained, I'm imagining the conversations get better. Like if you do a workshop for a whole organization and
Hmm.
everybody's kind of trained with certain skills, like the questions get better and
Hmm.
answers get better.
It's
So
so true. Yeah, and I see it, right? And a lot of the thing that we're doing at my firm now is really honing in and focusing on this message around equipping leaders to really increase their influence organization wide. So enterprise wide, meaning, people are tooled up with the skills to influence and communicate, down, across, up within all the different layers of the organization. And there's a couple companies that I work with where we lead, emerging leader programs. So these are people who are getting ready for leadership roles. And I give so much kudos to this organization for investing at that level for their leaders, because just think of the impact we have now of people who are getting ready to get into leadership, that we are equipping them with these skills so that when they get into leadership, they are setting an example for people. Because I see so often we've had people who've been in these leadership roles who for however long, years and years, and they don't have the skills, and sometimes they can get really stuck in the ways and not maybe as open to it, or they just weren't given the tools. The company didn't have the money to invest in them, and so now they have been unprepared. And so working with, people who are getting into leadership roles and giving them the tools right off the bat to work on presentation skills, to work on, giving like coaching and feedback to people on their team, to work on crucial conversations, they then are setting the ripple effect and the example for all of those they're leading.
is leadership changing? Are you seeing that? I know there was a lot of times, and when I worked in corporate, it was pre-COVID. It was 100% in person, where some leaders were hiding in their desks with the door shut. Some leaders were wandering around the office, making sure everybody was busy. And that style, I feel like, um, it was kind of a little outdated. Like if I could
Mhm.
physically see you working, I know you're working. Where if you're working remotely, then I don't have any proof, and I assume you're just doing your laundry or going out to do stuff.
Mhm.
Like how much has the environment that we worked in changed the way people need to think about leadership, where you might be talking to somebody on a screen or training somebody that you've never even met in person and will never see in the office. Like how I feel like the communication style is different, and those skills that maybe used to work, where you could maybe read somebody's body language or kind of get a vibe from somebody, like that might not be there anymore. So what do you say to leaders that are trying to transition into this kind of newer environment that
Mhm.
feel like what used to work isn't exactly connecting?
Yeah, and I mean, it's a great point, and we've obviously seen over the last, I say few years, but man, it's been, I don't know how, yeah, fast, like, 3, 4 years flies by that we've been in all these different transitions. I mean, leaders really were thrown into the fire when it came to how do I navigate remote work? How do I navigate, nobody in the office? And now what I'm seeing a lot is, it went from we're going to go totally remote because everyone had to be, we're going to stay remote. And then a lot of organizations kind of pulling that back and going, wait a minute, we're losing our culture as a company because everybody's remote. And so now we're navigating the how many days a weekend do people have to be in the office? We have some people virtual. So it really has been quite the transition. And a couple of things is, again, I don't necessarily think leaders were fully prepared because they couldn't be and equipped for how to navigate that change and have that flexibility and sort of flex their style. And so that's the thing is really as a leader, I would say it's like a dance, kind of knowing when do you need to lead and be in front, when do you need to walk alongside, and when do you need to kind of go behind and let other people lead. And so as a leader, it's not a one size fits all. The way that you lead and communicate with somebody cannot be exactly the same that you do with somebody else, whether they're in the office or virtual. So I would say that's the first thing is like really figuring out how do I have to flex my style based on somebody else's personality, what works for them, and then also their physical location. I think that's one of the biggest challenges. It's like, okay, we already were having communication issues when everyone was sitting in a room together and they could see each other and, walk to get coffee together. And now you add in a layer of people all over on technology. Some have their camera on, some don't have their camera on. And so now we just took what already was a problem and we just like expanded it. And so honestly, the biggest thing is I'd say you have to figure out what's going to work for you, for your team. You have to figure out how can you individually meet people's needs and then also setting expectations and holding to those expectations. Because oftentimes where we see that huge breakdown in communication, people leaving, this financial hit that it has on people is because there was never clear communication and expectations to begin with. Sometimes I'll ask leaders, like, have you set that expectation with them that they're supposed to be doing that? Well, sort of. Like, do they know it? Maybe not, right? So we have to start there. We have to have clear understanding of what does good communication look like? How do we give feedback? What are your expectations for working out? Like all of those things. And then we need to remind people of it. And then we need to reinforce it.
Yeah. I feel like that shouldn't they just know is
Right.
kind of not the
Yes.
right answer. And yeah, I think that is definitely something that like all of these skills are helpful. When I managed a team, they were traveling and they were auditors. And I remember I was never able to watch them work because they were on site different places. So we had one day where we'd try to all be in the office on Tuesdays. And then the communication was just different. It was a little bit more frequent than the teams that were local that I could see because those didn't require a weekly check-in because that would have been overkill. So I think it was different where a lot of people like I'd experienced like not watching my people work and,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of judging them on different things and looking at different ways to evaluate performance besides sitting at their desk on time.
Yeah. Well, and
Doing that.
one thing I want to add in there too is this level of trust. I mean, I talk to people about this all the time is how do we create trust within the relationships and within our team? And when there is a lack of trust, that is where we see a lot of communication issues.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think you have to, you can't, I think some people are like, okay, like if their team's thing turns green or red, like, and that to me is just like, I, I mean, I'm self-employed
Mm-hmm.
now, maybe for a reason, but like that level of like, okay, well, I guess that's the new, I can see you at your desk working. So I feel comfortable where that is just not how people want to be
Mm-hmm.
treated, like they can't be trusted or that they have to be monitored with their camera on during business hours. So I feel like there is so much that's changing and not working, and that some newer employees or younger,
Mm-hmm.
younger people might be like, absolutely not, we're
Mm-hmm.
not doing it. So I love that there is so much that we can learn on our own even if no one else is doing it and no one else is. I think there are some things that we can work on ourselves to be a better communicator up and down and across. But I want to talk now since, we talked about being in those positions now, but I want to talk about entrepreneurs and people
Yeah.
who are now self-employed. Maybe they left that environment to work for themselves. And I know your podcast is called It Starts With You. And I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, it starts and ends. If you are
Mm-hmm.
self-employed with you, there's no one to look at, there's no one to blame. But we still have to have those conversations. There's never a person who's just doing it all alone. You have
Mm-hmm.
clients, you have shareholders, you have customers, you have all of these things never really go away. So I'm thinking about some of the entrepreneurs that I know, and maybe they're listening, that have really great businesses that they went into, like mission driven businesses, but they're afraid to maybe speak up, to be
Mm-hmm.
seen, to so that they want the product or the service to lead the way. But ultimately, I find that people work with people. And what are your thoughts when it comes to how entrepreneurs and business owners can use things like speaking engagements or presentations, or even showing up on social media or other ways to get the word out. If they're really stuck knowing what they want to do, but not sure how to get past those beliefs about showing up or being seen too much.
Yeah. I mean, this is true. Like, I love it because I've obviously, but you've been in both worlds too. I worked in corporate for a long time, and now I work with corporate, and I also am an entrepreneur, and I also work with entrepreneurs. And so I love to see the impact on both sides because, I wouldn't say one necessarily struggles more than another, but like you said, it's the impact that it has, because when you're in an organization, sometimes it can be easy to say, well, if I don't speak up, someone else on the team will, or I'm not responsible. I don't have it on my shoulders whether this company failed, unless you're at the head of the company. As an entrepreneur or small business owner, like you alluded to, it does start and end with you. Like it is, especially if you're a solopreneur, or if you're growing a team, if you aren't speaking up about who you are, what you do, how you can help people, most likely you're not being very successful in business. And that's just the reality. Because, and again, I say this to say, your way of showing up doesn't have to be my way of showing up, but you have to be showing up. There's no way to grow business without having conversations and getting your message out there to people. And now, obviously, I'm a little bit biased because I'm a speaker and I help people use speaking to grow their business. But I think speaking is one of the best ways to do that. And with that said, there's a lot of different ways to do it. So the thing is I remember when I worked in corporate, probably 6 years, we'll say like 6 years ago now, the idea of being a business owner had never crossed my mind. Honestly, I was like, that is not me. That is so outside of who I am, my identity. I really hated salesy, like, oh, I don't want to feel salesy, because I had created a definition of salesy that was very negative. And so if that's you right now and you are like, oh, I don't want to be salesy, I don't want to make people feel uncomfortable, you really have to catch yourself and rewrite that, because if that's how you're viewing sales, you most likely are not getting very many sales because you've got this negative connotation. So it's how do we flip that script around? I'm not just being salesy, I'm helping people. Like you have a service or a product that people need. You started it for a reason. And so really anchoring back into your why you even have this business and the impact that it can have on people, that really made a big shift for me, where it was like, if I don't get out there and start talking about this and the problems people are having and how I can help them solve it, then people are going to keep staying stuck. And that right there can be really good motivation, because I believe that people who start a business do it because they want to help people and they want to have an impact. So if you anchor back into that impact, it can be that kick in the butt where it's like, okay, if I don't, and I say this with speakers, like you have a message, you have something out there and people are waiting for you. They're waiting for you and the way that you say it, and only the way that you can say it in your experiences. So anchoring back into that can really help. And then I say finding what works for you. So for you, it might be going to networking events and having more intimate, like one-on-one conversations with people. It might be, showing up on social media, showing up online, and maybe you don't want to go on video. I am going to challenge you though, Misty, we were talking about this before we hit record, is the fact that people want to work with people they know. I will say that the majority of clients I get from social media, they tell me it's because they've been following me, whether LinkedIn or Instagram, and they feel like they know me. And when you see me on social media and then you get on a phone call with me, you meet me in person, I want to be congruent in that person, because I want to attract in the right people to work with me. And so when you start to show your personality and you start to show video, people feel like they can get to know, like, and trust you quicker, which also shortens the sales cycle for people wanting to work with you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think that's something that this is such, and it's funny when I started to try to show up more on video and put something out regularly, it did help, because the people who were meeting with me afterwards that had liked a few things or maybe never ever interacted with any of the posts at all will say like, oh yeah, no, I already, like, they're already decided. And I knew, like, I already knew that I was going to, work with you, and I'd been following you for a little while because I was like, oh no, that's the person. And we think that, maybe we have to be like the most enlightening, brightest person in the room and come out with this content that's like mind blowing. And like some of my simplest videos
Yeah.
on basic topics get the most like, or when you look like you think like, you didn't try hard enough or whatever, but
Mm.
people aren't necessarily looking to work with the most attractive speaking coach or most,
Mhm.
like this or that. They want someone that they feel like they can actually connect with and learn from.
Mhm.
And so all of those things like, okay, well, my hair is not done today, or yeah, but somebody already said this on a video that I saw, because we tend to be in an echo chamber in our industry
Yes. Yeah.
where we're seeing like, oh, well, somebody over here just talked about, this type of account. So everybody must have seen it. Like,
Mhm.
which is so not true. But I feel like there's so many reasons why we can kind of talk ourselves out of it. And it really just comes down to the fact that it's scary.
Yeah, you're avoiding it because you're like, I don't want to, show up in video. I don't want to, and I would just argue that very few people are going to sign on to work with somebody, no matter what you do, product, service, if they don't feel like they know you. It might be a referral that somebody gave them, but most likely they have been, same thing. I'll have people who have been following me and I had no idea they were following me. But then I'll get a message and they'll say, hey, I really like your energy. I want to
Mhm.
join a program with you. And we never maybe even hopped on a call because they felt like they knew me so well. And so whether it's on video or in person, people have to see you. They have to get to know your personality. They have to know how you can help them. And it's really hard to do that if you're hiding.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And I think it is something that, again, comes with that repetition where eventually it just gets easier because you've done it a number of times and it's not as scary anymore. But I could see that initial feeling. So even if you start with something that you can talk about very clearly or you're very confident about, or a common question, like think about the things that your current, clients or things that you're seeing and reading about that could be interesting, because maybe people haven't heard it from you.
Mhm.
And your take on things can be very unique and interesting. And like with Julie, Julie is in Wisconsin. I am in Massachusetts. That did not really matter to
Mhm.
me because I was able to see her every week, kind of
Mhm.
talking about some of the things that I was curious about. So it's very important to if you're trying to get, you know, even to be seen. And maybe for those people that say, I hate video, I hate that, like even if that means pitching to do articles or writing posts for social media or writing, like putting your voice out there so people can connect with you or can learn from you. I feel like that's so important because we just assume that like the clients will just find out that it's worth it and knock on the door.
Yeah.
And that is just
Wouldn't that be
unfortunate.
great?
It's just
They're
not the
just
way it
pounding
works.
down the door.
Yeah, so figure out your communication. And if you can write well, then maybe that could be a podcast. Maybe that could be something different.
Mhm.
There's so many different ways to get your voice out there that it's just the most important thing that people do, which leads me to wanting to talk about your speaking training. I know I did your boot camp, and
Mhm.
then I went dark for a couple months because I had things going on in
Yeah.
business. But you might have been like, "Oh, what did I do?" Where I was like, we never know really necessarily
Mhm.
who's out there and what's happening. And then you had the Speaker Academy at a good time, which I joined
Mhm.
in a later one. And what I loved about the Speaker Academy is because a lot of us maybe have things that we want to say or think that we could speak about, but we just don't know how. Like, how do people get booked to do workshops or keynote? Like, how does that even happen? Most of us just assume when we go to these conferences that those people were handpicked or reached, like, and I think it's interesting to think about, you know, how to pitch, how to do those things, because
Mhm.
it can help you get on something local, or there's so many
Yeah.
different ways to do it. And I think that that is the part that people don't really understand. That was really helpful to learn in the academy, as well as a bunch of other things. So I'd love to hear from you about what you've got going on out there for people, either on the leadership training side or on the speaking side, for people who maybe have this as a goal for this year.
Yeah. And thank you so much for that highlight. And here's what I've learned in my years now as an entrepreneur. And honestly, I learned this from getting certified as a coach is I genuinely really release attachment to when people decide to work with me. Because here's the thing, I always like I don't want prisoners in my coaching, I always say in my trainings. I don't want when I work with organizations, I tell them what type of communication are you having around the expectations they're coming into this training? Because I don't want to have people as prisoners in anything that I'm doing. I want it to be especially if you're an entrepreneur, like choosing to come into my space to work with me, it's like, I want you to feel ready because when you are, starting to really get out there and use your voice more, it's going to bring things up. And we want you to be in the space that it's right for you. And so that's actually often what I see is people start with my boot camp. And, that's a 5-day boot camp that I've done. And we've got a 4-day one coming up here. And people usually start there and then they're like, I don't know if it's the right time yet, but usually whether that round or the next round, then they come into the academy. And so a couple of the things that I offer from a corporate side, I do one-on-one coaching. So if you're somebody who's looking for specific coaching as a leader around how to really use your voice, how to have more influence within the organization, or if you're looking to bring this into your organization to help with your leaders to have training, we'll drop all the contact information in the show notes and you can reach out. Or even if you're looking for a speaker on this topic. So I talk on a few different topics around unboxing potential, conscious leadership, the power of presence. So those are a few of the talks. And then if you are an entrepreneur or small business owner who's really trying to grow your business this year in a different way, not just on social media, but also doing more speaking in other ways. So maybe it's podcasts, maybe it's, speaking at events, being a keynote speaker, workshops. I love to talk all things speaking. So a couple of different things we have this year, we have the Speaker Space membership. So this is a great starting point for somebody who's wanting to get into speaking, or even of my clients who have worked with me, they're like, wait, I want to stay in your world. We have the membership, and this is really to learn, grow, and connect with other speakers because you can really get a lot of speaking opportunities by knowing other speakers. So that's a monthly membership. And then we have the Speaker Academy, which is my signature 10-week program. I say this is like the A to Z, like all of the things, the one-stop shop for speaking, where we can help you get clear on your message, your talk, or your workshop, how to position you as a speaker, where to find opportunities, how to pitch, how to price, all of the things that you need to help tool you up to help you in your speaking journey. So those are some of the things that we've got coming up this year.
And that's great. And you're right about like connecting with people and even, some of the people that I was in the academy with, they're now doing speaking opportunities where they're talking to somebody who's looking for financial, like, it's just amazing how many of those connections kind of come organically, but also, it's just building that network, which might be a new network. It might be a different group of people that you haven't worked with. But again, like if you're looking to grow or learn in a different, a different skill or a different, maybe something to add a different level of value to your business, there's people out there doing it. There's probably people who have figured out ways. And so it's so nice to kind of get that inside information from somebody who's been doing this for a while. So definitely please, go to Julie's website. We'll just put all the links in the show notes. I think that this is just such a valuable thing for leaders and for anybody who's looking to kind of build that confidence to take advantage of. So thank you so much, Julie, for joining me today. And thank you everybody for listening. I think it is, I think it's important for all of us to start to use our voice more and get out there. I think there's plenty of people who are out there waiting to hear what you've had to say. So thank you so much for joining, and we'll talk again next week.